I feel like Bitcoin's lost its narrative. If you invest in an ETH NFT, let's say, you get the ETH exposure. So if ETH goes from wherever we are today, 1,700, and it goes to 3,400, your NFT might move around a little bit versus ETH, but generally speaking, you get that ETH appreciation. Now, if you get it right, so, one of the reasons that I bought a punk recently was the fact that, okay, they're about as cheap as they've been, and they're like stable at 65 ETH right now. They're like high-end property. So as the market goes up, they tend to outperform because people want to show off and they want to invest their ETH and they want to buy these things. So they tend to be a call option on the bull market. I still get the ETH exposure, but if I'm right and punks triple, which would go back to the high, then I get the ETH exposure tripled. Mm-hmm. And people don't understand this, which is why some of those grails, some of those art ones are potentially really good investments, because what's the downside of a punk in ETH terms? 30%? What's the upside? 300%? That's a 10 for 1 on an asset that's already going up, potentially 10 for 1 as well. That's really interesting to me. And then if you can degen and find these projects, as you said, you've seen 6529's meme cards have gone from virtually nothing to, 2 ETH. It's like, oh my God, these 10Xs. Or more.
I think collectively, but those are worth like over 50,000 ETH, if I'm not mistaken. But no, to your point, I think also like I know you've been tracking a lot of what Yuga's done and Bored Apes, and if you look at what they've done from a order of operations perspective in terms of building up a larger community, right? I think we're going to see a lot more of these types of models too, where you have this kind of base, let's say Genesis type of collection that an initial community is founded upon. But by holding that, it also gives you access to future drops of other assets.
Yeah,
right,
that's what we're doing with the realvision Genesis NFT. Same thing. It's like you're the OG and you get accrued all the benefits.
Right, exactly. So I think we're going to see more and more of those models. I think somebody who did that really well that, continue to be close with, and I'm just impressed with everything that they're doing, is Micah Johnson, what they're doing with Aku, right? I know we've talked at length and I've even interviewed him on Real Vision. But I just think the way in which he went about, doing the chapters, and then those were open editions. So you had different total supply for each of the individual chapters.
Has anybody tokenized stuff like an ape yet? Because with a scarce asset, you can't fractionalize the price, right? I can't buy a fraction of an ETH, but I can buy a fraction of an ape. I can buy a fraction of an ETH. So that's very egalitarian, because everybody can put 10% of their assets in regardless of how much money you've got. But with a punk, you can't. Have people done that kind of stuff yet? So you can democratize access to even the rare assets in digital world? Because if not, it's kind of, we're still not doing our job properly.
Yeah, so there are platforms that allow you to do this, right? In which you can fractionalize NFTs and create more liquidity around, or more accessibility, I guess I'd say, around some of these higher priced items. It's almost somewhat similar to, in a sense, what we're talking about with like liquid staking derivatives, right? Where if you don't have enough ETH to, let's say, run a validator yourself, you can, deposit it in one of these LSD platforms to be able to say, I want to stake 1 ETH, I want to stake 2 ETH, whatever it is, and it gives you that accessibility, right? If you don't have the means to be able to do it. There's, I think, still some questions around when you fractionalize, let's say, an ape, right, or even a punk. Apes is probably more applicable here, just given the other utility or ways in which you can use it. There's still questions, I think, around, at the end of the day, who owns that, right? Or like if it comes to, some type of voting for an NFT, a high price NFT, and you have 1,000 people that own fractional shares of it, is there a way in which you basically just aggregate what the, almost like proxy voting, you aggregate what the general sentiment is of all the owners, and then that gets pushed forward as the single vote from, an ownership perspective. So there's still questions, I think, around that. But in terms of exposure, yeah, there's platforms that are now fractionalizing NFTs and even starting to allow you to borrow and lend against, your NFT holdings.
I think it's interesting because both of us are really focused on this kind of mass consumer adoption part. That's where I think the next phase is, you heard it from the CEO of Microsoft saying it will have its AI moment at some point. What is it going to be? Well, we'll come on to DeFi in a sec, but the financial system is slow to adopt it. They're testing it, but at scale, to get the NASDAQ to adopt it for securities and stuff like that takes a long time. So it feels that retail brands and that part is where the next really big phase is. I think you agree with that as well. That's probably where, because for this whole space to grow, we have to go from 300 million users to 1 billion users this time around or more. And that's going to come from something else that is at scale. And we've seen, you and I have been involved with this stuff like Ticketmaster that I've talked about a lot. And, we're seeing people use this. We've just seen California talk about putting car registration documents on Tezos. It's like, okay, that's kind of interesting as well. Two things. One, I forgot to ask this before, is I feel like Bitcoin's lost its narrative.
Bitcoin, I think, is, I'll probably get blasted for this, it's the least exciting thing to me in crypto.
And some people will say that's the point of it. I get that too.
I think especially with, the ETH merge and now ETH's economics changing, right, and altering, I think it definitely took away some luster from the Bitcoin crowd around, digital scarcity and an actual kind of hard cap.
Hey visionaries, thank you for tuning in. For more free crypto content like this, head over to realvision.com/crypto. You'll get early access to the most brilliant minds in the space to cut through the noise, get in-depth analysis, and get you ahead of the curve with unbiased insights.